Kyle Yorlets was a 24-year-old singer from Nashville, Tennessee. He was part of a band called Carverton. They describe it as a mixture between pop and rock. He was killed by 5 children between the ages of 12 and 16. This story hasn't received much nationwide coverage. In fact, it seems like the mainstream media wants to bury it. And the reason this story is not being covered is because it is inconvenient to the narrative that the mainstream media wants to push. Specifically, the perpetrators, all 5 of these kids, were black and the victim was white. And in these cases, whenever something like this happens, it tends to be pushed down and not really covered the same way it would be if the reverse was true. Like, for instance, if you imagine for a second that you have a black 24-year-old singer who, exact same situation, who was killed by 5 white teenagers. Can you imagine the media frenzy? How it would be everywhere about, how this was a hate crime and how it was in some way emblematic of Trump's America, and they'd be going on about how Trump's rhetoric in some way had caused it. We all know this. It's all about pushing the narrative. And to me, if somebody commits a heinous act, they've committed a heinous act. Race doesn't change whether or not it's heinous, whether or not it's an awful thing that happened or a tragedy. But for the media, for them, it does. To the media, race matters. So it's kind of ironic that you have these media people always, shouting racist at people. The media people really are the racists. They cover stories differently, based upon the race of the victims and the perpetrators. And let's get to this actual story, okay? The kids were riding around in a stolen vehicle. They had 2 stolen guns, and they saw Kyle out in his front yard in front of his house. They decided to rob him. So they stopped and they demanded his wallet, and he gave it to them. They then demanded his car keys. When he refused, they shot him. It all just happened very rapidly. And I have to look back and remember what I was like at that age, between 12 and 16. And, I wasn't a normal kid because I had weird interests, like I was interested in politics. But I can tell you that I had a strong conscience. My conscience was fully developed. I knew the value of human life. I felt some sympathy and empathy for human suffering. These kids, they didn't. And I'm not just, making that up or even extrapolating. They laughed in a courtroom. They were pulled in front of a judge for committing murder, for killing someone. And they were there on the front row, laughing amongst themselves, being jovial. It's unreal. Now, let me just go ahead and show you this story. So here we are. 3 teen suspects in Nashville musician's murder thrown out of court for their behavior. Then we go down, and you've got this quote by their lawyer. It says, "We're dealing with children, and everybody needs to be responsible. Everybody needs to lock their cars and make sure that they don't leave their guns in there." Well, what's the implication? The implication is that the people who were stolen from are responsible for the actions of these kids. And I get that it's a lawyer, it's their lawyer, so the lawyer is supposed to defend them. And if he just said, my clients are innocent, that would be fine, whatever. But this offshooting of responsibility, of blame, onto the real victims, the people who were stolen from. That is, well, it's becoming so normal. That's why it bothers me, because these kids were obviously raised in an environment where they were never told to take responsibility. And now it's continuing to happen. Decades ago, they stopped reporting the race of perpetrators, especially if they were non-white. They used to say that it encouraged racism, right? Nowadays, they don't even bring it up, but that's what they used to say, that it encouraged racism when you got lots of whites killed by blacks, which is the way the statistics would break down. It's much more rare for the opposite to happen, which is what makes Black Lives Matter and so on so kind of ludicrous, because cops are more likely to be killed by black people, white people are more likely to be killed by police than black people are. So it just kind of ran completely opposite to what the statistics show. But these media people, they say that it encourages racism if they show the race of the perpetrators. No, it encourages accountability. And that's important. And also, when they do this, when they treat black crimes and white crimes so differently, what they do is they incite racism. Like, for example, if you wanted to create an environment where white people really were racist, right? Well, how would you do it other than you dismiss any crimes that are committed against white people, for example? You can do it with any race, but for now, like, if a white person is a victim of black crimes, if you didn't give that as much of attention as the opposite, if you only showed the perpetrators when they're white, you're going to create an environment that does foster racism. You know, I've heard this said, that racism amongst white people is increasing, and I'm not sure if that's true, but I would understand if it were, because they're doing the very things that would be most likely to cause it. You know, there's this thing with the media, and then there's these phrases like white privilege going around that is awful because it ignores the personal trials and tribulations and difficulties that people have to deal with. You know, white people included. It just kind of ignores all of that. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if racism were increasing, and stuff like this, the way that the media handles it, makes it worse. In fact, most of the news reports in this story, the news reports that actually took place at all, said 5 youths. They didn't even say what race, they didn't show pictures, anything. And black culture is made worse by the minimization of such crimes. They're being shown as normal, right? When you don't, it's like, I don't think that a person is just born black and therefore more likely to commit crime. I think a person is born into a culture that looks up to and in many ways glorifies criminality. And, you know, you've got black crime rates are higher now than like in the 60s or even the 50s, right? Or when there was more of a problem with racism than there is today. But when you have black citizens who try and escape that horrible mentality, trying to escape that culture, and I will say escape because that's accurate, when they, you know, succeed in the world and do well and make a name for themselves, they get, well, criticized by members of that black culture. They call them the Uncle Tom and so on. That's an environment where I can't imagine how difficult it would be to be a kid raised in that environment and, you know, to be able to succeed. It would make it harder. And at the same time, you've got these kids who are told that they're victims of oppression. It's just to pile the layers on. It's just kind of awful. And, you know, the kids have not yet been found guilty, but we do have the fact that the kids' statements are apparently contradictory. They were found with 2 stolen guns on them, and there was a witness to the murder. So you put it all together and it looks pretty bad. And the media coverage has been so bad that I wouldn't have even heard of this case. I wouldn't even have been familiar if it weren't for somebody in the comments who told me about it and asked if I'd cover it. And thank you for letting me know. You know, whatever your real name is, I appreciate it. I really do. But I imagine if you're watching this video, you probably are unaware of this case too. And it's wrong. It really is. And it's counterproductive to the sort of society that we all want to live in. But that's cultural Marxism. It's an attempt to turn everybody against each other on the basis of these immutable characteristics such as race and sex and so on. And that's what they're trying to do here. They're doing the very things that would encourage racism and encourage division, and it's not accidental. And with the way that the news is covering it, it kind of reminds me of 1984. And if you haven't read the book, you should. But in that book, they talk about how news organizations start not reporting certain stories and hiding it because it would encourage wrongthink or thought crimes. It's the same thing. Or even in the USSR, how to be a professional journalist in that environment, you had to be a member of the party. Right? And of course, we know who the party is in our environment, in our country. It's pretty clear. Alright, well, I thought I'd just let you know about this because, firstly, the story is important and it should get coverage, but also because it's so, well, it's an indication of what's going on. There are many different stories similar to this one that are also buried. The band that Kyle was a part of just released an album that he worked on with them. They just kind of released it to the public as you can donate what you want if you would like to buy it. The band's name again is Carverton, and they're also on all the different streaming music services. They kind of released it as a tribute. Alright, well, thank you for listening to this. If you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe. I've also got a link in the description that will provide you with a better way to be notified of new videos. I've also got links that will provide you with ways to support the production of these videos. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Stop! Don't leave yet. Since you made it to the end, you probably enjoyed that video. In that case, here are some other videos that you might enjoy. The updates link at the top will provide you with better ways to be more reliably notified of new videos, and it also has social media information, that kind of thing. That's because you know how this site is. Well, the link at the bottom, the store link, that's in case you're looking for merchandise or our healthier products. Thanks.